interview. So if you have Instagram, it's better to watch it that way because I'll be bringing on someone named Edlin Veras to talk about colorism, his research around colorism, get his perspective on, he's currently a doctoral candidate, but I'll let him tell you all more about himself. And as I wait for him to come on and join, I'm going to remind you all, of course, as I do every week, that the Colorism Healing Writing Contest is now underway. It opened in January, and the deadline is April 30th by midnight Central Time. And I think those are the only announcements. I think most of you all know I did a TED Talk, and that went really well. They said that the recording, the YouTube version, would be available maybe this week, hopefully, so fingers crossed. So I'll let you all know if you couldn't watch the live stream. I'll let you all know when that's available to watch on YouTube as well. Oh, I see you. You joined. So I'll wait for you to... There we go. Okay, let's see. Just got our introductions out of the way. I think I did that right. Oh, there you go. Yay. Hey, it's
how's
good
it going?
to
Good to see you as well. Let me figure this out real quick.
Yeah, take your time. So folks, I met Edlin on Twitter. We haven't really interacted much on Instagram. Instagram is like my platform of choice, you know, and the Facebook folks watching, they know that as well. But you know, it's rare to find men in particular who speak on colorism, who have interesting perspectives on colorism, but who are also like proactively discussing colorism. And so I was really impressed when I found your Twitter page and then to learn that you're working with Own Your I Am, right? An organization founded by Raven Roberts to raise awareness about colorism. So I'm excited to jump into all of that. But we'll start by letting you just introduce yourself and tell people who you are. I did share your bio, but in case people or don't remember.
Yeah, so as Dr. Webb said, my name is Edlin Veras. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of South Florida. I study racialization processes in the US and in the Caribbean. And since 2019, I've been working with On Your I Am, trying to put on programs and have discussions either on here on IG Live, on Twitter, Clubhouse, wherever people will listen to us so we can talk about colorism. And that's really a program spearheaded by Raven Roberts. And yeah, so I'm really just excited to be here to discuss, to talk, to, you know, just see what it's about. You know?
All right. So we'll also be taking audience questions. So anyone who's watching, and I do have a stream going on Facebook. So Facebook people can hear you, Edlin, but even if they can't see you.
Oh, cool.
Has questions either on Instagram or Facebook, let me know. On Instagram in particular, if you use at the bottom of your screen, if you use the question mark with the comment, I will see your question. It's hard sometimes to distinguish between comments and questions. So if you really want me to see your question, then use the question mark feature at the bottom. That'll help me distinguish between comments and questions. So I think the way I usually start is just with the very basic question about when, how, or why, or all three. It's not that big. Why did you first become aware of this issue called colorism?
Oh, yeah. So I think I was 17. I was 17. I had just went away to college, and it was an ice cream social. And I introduced myself to this young woman, and she's like, "You lighter than a brown paper bag." And I said, you know, and then that kind of stuck with me for a little bit. And I would later find out that kind of terminology and where the history of that, where that kind of originated, and it just fascinated me. And then my own kind of family background from the Dominican Republic kind of has an interesting race ethnicity dynamic as well. So yeah, I mean, ever since then, I kind of really just dove in head first and realizing moving from South Florida, so Broward area. If I don't know if anyone's familiar, not too far from Miami, to then going to Atlanta, the deep South, in a different type of way. Really kind of unpack some interesting questions about skin tone in a way that we're always relevant, but we're relevant in a different way in Atlanta. And from there, I just kind of dove into it and been studying it and living it ever since.
Okay, so now I have all kinds of follow-up questions that you said.
Yeah.
So I kind of, what I love, what reason I love talking to people from all around the world and different backgrounds is the comparative analysis. And I know I can use words like that with you.
Yeah.
Of how colorism shows up in different places, right? And so could you talk more about that difference? Like, why do you think Atlanta is different from South Florida? Like, unpack that a little bit.
Oh yeah, sure. So in in South Florida, there were a lot of folks from all over Latin America and the Caribbean. So people were primarily identifying other folks by country of origin, is what I found. So, oh, you're from Jamaica, you're Haitian, you're Bahamian, you're Bayesian, you're this, that. And skin color was definitely there, right? But it was, I won't say secondary, but it was a little more in the background. In Atlanta, it's like, okay, you black and you white, and then you something else. But like, and then the gradations of blackness kind of was at the forefront of a lot of conversations. So while nation of origin was important in Atlanta, it wasn't nearly the same as it was in South Florida, where again people were more readily identifying and being identified by their parents' country of origin and things like that. So in Atlanta, it was a lot about um, yeah, skin tone, where you fell, as a black person, where you fell on that kind of spectrum, and then it became, how you high yellow, all these things, um, and yeah, that I mean and then learning the history about those different locations, right? So Miami has this kind of global is a global city, right? It has gotten these migrations from all over. Atlanta does have migration as well, certainly. Um, but again, the different type of deep south. I always like to, you know, geographically speaking, Miami's further south than Atlanta, but it doesn't have the same feel. It doesn't feel the same when you
Right.
walk into an all-white establishment or something. So I always talk about that.
That's such a good point. You're right. Like Miami is further south, but it's not the same south, not the same.
Right.
So in terms of the diaspora, right? You talk about being from the Dominican Republic, and so in terms of that, more internationally, do you see patterns or contrasts or similarities even when we look at the broader diaspora versus the United States
Oh yeah. So in
operates?
yeah. So in a lot of ways, I always tell people that while race may be a little different in different places, colorism remains about the same, where people with the darkest skin color are going to be, on the lower levels of society in terms of access to resources and so on and so forth. So in that way, it's like pretty similar. You can go anywhere and you'll find the darkest folks, even in predominantly black countries, right? The darker skinned folks are going to be disadvantaged. Um, so I always found that kind of constant. I think what's interesting is the countries that adopt or don't adopt kind of the one drop rule. So you can have people, you can be born into a family where both parents are visibly black, or maybe one parent's visibly black. But if you come out a different color, if you're not unambiguously black, then you're not labeled as black in that country, or you're not recognized as black, right? And that's a social construction of race that we all know about, and race is going to show up differently in different places, so that's always interesting. Um, and then, of course, a lot of the conversations that come up around, in my research and even in other places in Latin America, the discussions about how money lightens. So there's a saying in fact, one of my interviews in the Dominican Republic, he says if you're black and you have money, they call you a black man. If you're black and you don't have money, they call you Haitian. So in that respect, there's a really interesting dynamic between race, ethnicity, color, in
Wow.
ways that I don't see in other places. but that is really, deeply intertwined and embedded in the social fabric of the Dominican Republic. So there's a lot there to unpack, and I'm excited to continue to write about that as I try to finish this dissertation.
Go, you can do it.
Thank you.
Um, so I'm thinking about your research in the diaspora, and what would you say are some of the, in terms of the continent itself, right? Have
Mm.
is this a part of your research when you're thinking about the diaspora? Do you notice any particular patterns coming from the continent itself that carried over with us as we, you know, went for various reasons to other parts of the world?
Hmm. And so patterns with respect to what? With respect to culture or
Uh,
other
co-
things?
Ideas and attitudes about skin tone and or even features and hair and that kind of thing.
Okay. So you know what? Again, I'll draw from my research and thinking about when I asked folks, for example, where do Black people come from? Like, where, if they had to tell me, someone who doesn't know anything about this place, where would you say Black people come from? And surprisingly, a lot of folks were like, I'm not really sure, but I think Africa, maybe Africa. And this is, these are folks who are unambiguously Black, clearly African descendant, from Haiti, from in generations in the country of Haiti, now living in DR. So they're saying these things and they're not really sure, which I always found fascinating. But it's also something that I know exists in other places where folks aren't really sure where other people origins are. But then there's this interesting anti-Blackness undercurrent that you see in that, and they say, well, you know, Africans have uglier people than us Haitians, even, just so you know that. So I'm trying to contain myself, right? So, you just try to get all this, you just trying to have these conversations and let them speak their minds. And some of these things that they say are really kind of jarring that,
Mm,
if it wasn't this person, you would think it's maybe a racist, non-Black person saying these things and talking about, and the conversations of good hair and bad hair, for example, very prevalent, very prevalent, even among the people with the darkest skin and the
mhm.
coiliest hair. So that those the fact that that is part of the everyday culture and language is super interesting. And we also know it's a result of like social forces and whatnot. So it's not a it's not just to blame the person for for their ideas or attitudes necessarily, but kind of understand where it's coming from. And so
Absolutely.
those ideas definitely persist in interesting ways that I was not expecting initially going into my research.
Yeah. So it seems like to kind of reflect on what you're saying throughout the diaspora, because I know I've definitely seen and heard those attitudes about that the continent of Africa in the United States, right? Various places.
Hmm.
And so there's like we talk about anti-blackness, but there's that stems from anti-Africa, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So and like I don't think we talk about that correlation. Like anti-blackness is also a direct result of like that. Um, so I kind of want to shift gears and talk about gender.
Ooh.
Again, I keep saying this, but we don't have conversations with men as much in terms of colorism, and you don't see men
Sure.
being represented in terms of narratives around colorism. So we'll
Hmm.
start again with your personal narrative if you're open to sharing. But have you found how has the intersection of gender and skin tone played out for you in ways that you've observed?
So I think in a few ways, I mean, obviously, like in a systemic way, I'm benefiting, perhaps the most as being very, very light skinned and being male and, so forth. Um, so I'm sure I'm the more palatable of folks in a lot of spaces, and that privilege is a result of all these histories. Um, I think the other side of that I wasn't quite sure about or wasn't quite expecting, I think, is how skin tone is tied to masculinity or performances of masculinity that aren't always super prevalent or super, you know, at the forefront of people's minds. So even so, again, in Atlanta, my thesis research was on African American men and colorism, and so I did focus groups with self-identified light-skinned men and self-identified dark-skinned men.
Uh-huh.
And these findings were super interesting. And you know, mind you, it was small. It was a thesis. It was small. So
Yeah.
I hope in the future to do kind of bigger studies and maybe nationally representative. But some of the things that, you know, one of the quotes that kind of stuck out with me was someone said to one of the light skinned participants, he said, you know, you're different than I thought you were. For a light skinned man, you have dark skinned tendencies. I said, well, what the hell does that mean? Right. And the idea was he was more approachable, he was more down to earth, he was cooler, and he wasn't as soft as he was perceived to be, as feminine as he was perceived to be. Right. So we also know these ideas of blackness and black masculinity, stemming from slavery as hypersexual, you know, brutes and so on and so forth. So, right, the that spectrum, if you're on the further away from that, you're going to be less likely to be associated with being dangerous, right? So a lot of the lighter skinned men in my sample were always talking about trying to be hyper masculine to compensate for their skin tone, for the perceptions of their skin tone and how they would behave as being hypersensitive or too emotional in their romantic relationships, their interpersonal relationships with other men. And this is stemming all the way from, you know, elementary school through college. So this is a life course trajectory that men are dealing with their skin tone and aren't really being able to talk about it. You know, a lot of men in the study were saying, like, hey, I never said this stuff before. I never talked about this before. I had one young man who was self-identified as very dark skinned, and you know, he's like, my cousins were much lighter than I was, and everyone always wanted to touch their hair, and nobody wanted to touch my hair. Like, no,
Mm.
my grandma, you know, and it's like, wait a minute, you know, because these things we don't really associate them with, you know, young boys trying to,
Right.
right, but this is what we're seeing, that some of these kids are affected. Um, so yeah, a lot of that stuff was really surprising to see, and to see it so consistently. Mind you, a small sample, right, but still pretty consistent, one narrative to the next. So yeah, that's super. When gender is there, you see a lot of different things that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, there was so much there in what that little bit you said. Like, yeah, I really feel like that could be a whole series, right? Just based off of your thesis. So to keep doing that, please revisit that topic.
Yes, thank you. I'm hoping to get it for public, trying to publish part of it later this year. So
Yeah,
I'll keep you posted.
here you go. Keep us posted. Share those links on Twitter. Um, But so I also kind of want to pick out certain things that you said or highlight certain things that you said around hypermasculinity. And
Mhm.
that's what intersectionality is, right? It's the pressure of patriarchy and misogyny on top of the stereotypes about people's skin tones. And they
Mhm.
are stereotypes, right? And I think that's part of a conversation people can understand and relate to, no matter what their background is the idea of a stereotype. And so
Absolutely.
stereotyping someone based on their skin tone as being more masculine or being less masculine is harmful, right, and reductive, and needing to see people as humans first and let their actual personality and behavior guide the way you perceive them. There was a comment by Ati Shati that talked about, you know, in terms of women, because of those stereotypes, right? Darker skinned women aren't seen as feminine, right? And so that's
Right.
like sort of cross hatch of
Mhm.
some stereotypes. If dark skin is associated with masculinity, it's, you know, socially that benefits dark skinned men sometimes, but as you pointed out, in the justice system that harms them. And so it's like so
Right.
intricate and nuanced. And I think
Exactly.
it's really important to be aware of that. Let's see. Oh, so Audie Shawty said, would love to see you chat with a trans Black person on the topic of colorism soon as well. That's such an important convo that needs to.
Absolutely.
And I think, yeah, so I've reached out to some people and hopefully they're able to come on. But I think, yeah, in terms of the ability to be seen as feminine and or masculine, I can
Mhm.
understand that intersection. So I agree. I'm hoping to have that conversation going forward as well.
Absolutely.
So what would you say have been, actually, I'm going to back up because there was another question I had in my mind. Because you mentioned being 17 when you first had that feeling of like, oh, this colorism thing, this skin tone thing is an issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you experience before then, like growing up? Like, now that you have hindsight, right? So maybe you weren't conscious of it then, but now that you have done this work, are you able to then reflect back on your own childhood, the preteen years,
Mm-hmm.
and see things differently in terms of skin tone and color in your family or community?
So there's a few things. Let me say this. Before I moved to Miami, I lived in New Hampshire. So we're in the, I get that reaction all the time. So we're talking about, a town that was 96 to 98% white. And I was called all types of obscenities, right? N-word, this, don't belong here. And then back then I also had a very thick accent. So I had all these things that were working at the same time. And to that end, you know, I in retrospect, I'm able to see kind of like the that stuff build, I guess. Again, and then when I'm getting to Miami, like a very different kind of multicultural experience. Again, not to say that that stuff wasn't there. Um, so it was kind of like that earlier on, I guess in my childhood, it was just like us against like, not against like, but us, and then there's like white people. Like it's kind of like that because that's what all was around. Um, and then again, it changed in Miami. Now there's a second part to that question that's escaping me. Um, what was
Um,
it you said?
I think I was just asking, like, now that you have that
Oh, that's
confidence.
another thing, right? So then I was also able to pick up on different conversations that I overheard as a child, right?
Mm.
From extended family, just different things from older folks that you hear, and it's like, okay, these are really problematic things that are being said, right? That are happening within the family. Um, things about things about you know either staying out of the sun or marrying light, right? So there's a lot of there was like a lot of talk of that, and um, mostly stemming from I think my aunt who was not like, I don't know, she wasn't received well by her lighter skinned or white um, partner initially in the Dominican Republic, by their family.
Mm.
So kind of some of this rhetoric that you hear, that I was able to piece together later. That's like, wait a minute, this stuff isn't like, it's not cool, and it's like perpetuating a lot of these things that now is clearly an issue, but then um, was, I guess, normalized, for lack of a better word. Um, yeah, so yeah, and being able to piece it all together now, looking back and having all the knowledge I know now about different things, you see a lot of stuff that, um, for example, there's just like there's this saying that I don't know how many times I heard, that is still prevalent throughout Latin America. You're mejorando la raza, right? Bettering the race or improving the race, and people say that they have good intentions and they mean, marry well, but they're also saying like marry white, marry light, and so you kind of see these things and you heard these things, but you didn't realize like what they were stemmed in, or what, like, where they're stemming from rather. So yeah, that's, some difficult conversations you have to revisit with family members, now that you're an adult and you kind of have the vocabulary and whatnot. So yeah, it's been a journey, I'll say that.
Um, so I'm also curious, because it's interesting. I was thinking about this, how this is my first time like bringing guests on for my weekly live streams this month, and all like my first three guests have all been light skinned, like and pretty like fairly light skinned folks at
Hmm.
that. So I was thinking, I was like, what is That was accidental. So like for my fans, like y'all know. But I also feel like I'm always on here every week and I'm, holding it down for the dark skinned folks every week anyway. But I think there are like just great examples of how light-skinned people can show up to the conversation. So I'm being a little selfish here, Edlin, because I get a lot of direct messages. I get a lot of comments from light-skinned people asking what they can do, right? They want
Mm-hmm.
to know. They oftentimes ask dark-skinned people, well, how can I help? And, I want to know how to show up in this space. I want to know how to be an ally. I want to know, like what dark-skinned people need from me, or, like all kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've said a few times, I said, well, I know light-skinned people who are doing this work and who are doing it well. I know light-skinned people are having these conversations in ways that are, equitable and inclusive and fair and not, centering themselves necessarily. And so I said, there are examples out there. So what would you say to someone who has that question, right? How can light-skinned people show up as allies, best show up to have conversations about colorism in ways that are not silencing or overshadowing the voices and the experiences of darker skinned people?
I think about this question all the time because in some ways it's like I feel like it's an easy question, but then when I try to verbalize it, it's not always an easy question to answer. Um, and I think increasingly I am thinking about resources. That's kind of where I've been, ruminating on it for so long that more and more I think about it, I'm being pulled towards resources, and that's to say, okay, so and so is a you're a light skinned person that's a talented graphic designer. Cool. Go ahead and make graphics for the person that wants to that the darker skinned person that's creating a website, that's making pamphlets. You have connections at this radio station. Okay, plug that person at that radio station so they can, right. So like, there's not use your skills. I would say use your skills to put that person in a position to take advantage of something, whatever it is. If you have access to a space and you know that this person has an upcoming talk or an upcoming event they want to host, put them in the space, right? Facilitate that space for them. Facilitate a free or significantly bargain space, right? Money, resources like are actually important. So I think in that way, there's a very practical way to help folks where it's like, hey, I know so and so that works at this company, plug them. I think in a more abstract, but equally as helpful and beneficial way, is showing up for events, learning, doing the homework beforehand.
Mm.
Don't I don't always take kindly to folks who are like, what can I do? What can I do? It's like, well, have you done the work? Have you done any research first? Have you looked into it whatsoever?
Yeah.
Right? Come to me with, hey, this is what I've done. This is what I do. These are the skills I have to offer. Can you use these for your benefit?
Mm.
This is what I can offer. Can you use this? Yes or no? If you can, I'll come back again with something else. Right? Do the work, and I think that's the part that people aren't really doing. Um, and that said, I find myself in an interesting position as a light skinned man, and I get called out for it sometimes too, and that's completely fair, and I expect that, and I'll take the heat when it comes, like, yeah, like, I I am in these positions and I'm talking about this stuff and I'm aware of it, um, and I'll deal with it as it comes. So, I remember at one event, my advisor, who's a dark skinned woman with locks, and she gets asked to do a bunch of talks everywhere. She does great research, so she couldn't do this talk, so she put me. She's like, someone does similar research, so they're expecting this dark skinned woman who's like does this like Afro Brazilian work, and here I am, light skinned man. And I got called out after the show by a young black woman at the university. And she goes, what do you know about colorism? You're a light skinned man, and you're absolutely right. Like this space could have been for someone else. This person couldn't make it, so I'm just here because of that. You know what I mean? So there's ways to acknowledge my shortcomings and my privilege and my positionality and all that. And also, I feel like um, I try to do the work. I try to do the work. I try to plug people. I try to do this, and I try to encourage others to do the same. And as long as I'm doing that, I feel like, and as long as others are doing that, right? Other light skinned folks are doing that, I feel like that's going towards the right direction. The final thing I'll say about that is sometimes you're going to mess up. You're going to be an imperfect ally. You're going to be an imperfect accomplice, but at least you're doing something, right? Now, if someone checks you, like, heed their checking, like, acknowledge it, ponder on it, think on it. But you're gonna mess up sometimes, and that's what it is. Like, sometimes you're not gonna be perfect, but you're out here doing something.
Yeah. That was so good. See, I know I'm like always pleasantly surprised, but like not surprised by how good my guests are. Because like I don't know what y'all talking about, but then to actually hear you say it. B.O. Bay says sometimes a simple "I see you" can make all the difference, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
Definitely.
Raven Roberts says you do the work. So Raven Roberts is the founder of Own Your I Am. For anyone who's
Mm-hmm.
Edlin Veras is part of that organization. And so you can wave at Raven in the chat as well. JB1710 says, need more men like you to take a stand.
Thanks.
um, so if there aren't any other questions, I'm kind of wrapping up like in terms of my questions, Edlin, but also if there are like specific topics that you wanted to get in or things that came to mind, you can let us know. But folks, it's a reminder to, type in your questions if you have any before we wrap up here. But I kind of want to revisit the question around gender and men and have not them feeling like they don't have the space to say these things, right? And the fact that they're like, oh, I've never said this before. So for someone like me, for example, right? I'm going to ask you, because I haven't done the work, Edlin, I'm just letting you know. How can we hold space for men? And is it my place even to hold space for men? Do they need other men to hold space for them in terms of having these conversations around colorism? Because I'll admit, and I know now I'm just pretty. Hey, Lavonda. She did like a live stream with 3 men talking about colorism, so holding space for men to have these conversations. Do you have any thoughts or ideas or recommendations for either, just in general, how we can bring men into this conversation more fully?
So yeah, that is a really good question. So I'll say this first. Even in my own study, I realized that me being light skinned impacted the way the interviews went.
Yeah.
Right. So the darker skin focus group was substantively different, and it was a different feeling for sure, right? Because I'm asking them these interesting or difficult questions, and here I am, on the other side of the spectrum in many ways, right? Um, but I think there's a benefit and there's a downfall to that. So I don't think there's necessarily a good or bad judgment on that per se, but it's just going to be different. Um, so I'll step away from that real quick, and I'll say that I think that men and Black men overall need to be afforded the emotional latitude, um, the vulnerability even to have conversations that are oftentimes framed as uniquely feminine, and in many ways they are particularly feminine because of the way beauty and race and gender kind of come together. So there's definitely that. Um, that said, I think there is an undercurrent that doesn't allow men to show these type of nuances, right? Not a lot of men are going to walk around saying that, I wish my grandmother had played with my hair, had wanted to play with my hair, had touched my hair, right? Not a lot of men are going to say that, and I think that's gonna be rooted in ideas of masculinity and not letting men have the breadth of emotionality that women sometimes are afforded. And so that masculinity does in society does come with extreme benefits, right? And in a lot of ways, but I think a disadvantage that I would point out, I think, is the emotional latitude again, that and the vulnerability that men are not allowed to express. And I think colorism in many ways falls within that. And even when I was doing my pilot studies, I was talking to various folks, some athletes, college athletes and whatnot, NFL athletes even, and they would even like it was kind of like this, what do I look like talking about skin color? Like, as a man, what do I look like talking about my own skin color? You know, and it was kind of this idea like, how could I even approach this? And so again, giving men that space to, it's okay to talk about this thing that is affecting us in various capacities. So I think it's about that, about having an honest conversation about what masculinity, how masculinity is limiting our ability to speak on whatever.
I agree with that, and I think the so I've said this before, like in on like my personal Facebook page and stuff too. And I think for women, we have to be careful about like that internalized patriarchy and misogyny in which we judge men. So like other men judge men for expressing emotional things, but women
Hmm.
judge men, right? We also roll our eyes if a man, says he was hurt at age 10 or something like that. And so I think there's just even in our comportment and our demeanor around a man who might start to cry, for example, or around a man who's sharing a vulnerable thought or feeling or idea, sometimes rolling your eyes or like being like, like, why is he? So I think subtle things like that can even invite people to be honest and to be open as well.
Hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. We do have some questions that came in, and y'all know
Okay.
I love my folks, so I gotta ask some questions as well.
Sure, sure.
So the first one from Armando Rivera, 1989, aka Jorge, who was on last week, says,
Okay,
"What
okay.
do you do with colorism in your familia?" And I know you kind of touched on that, but maybe just like a quick revisit of that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what's been most effective for me is kind of asking people like, well, why do you think you're saying that? Or whatever the comment is, right? Oh, so and so is, is attractive for being dark skinned, for example, or for a dark skinned person, that person's attractive. It's like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Is the assumption that, X, Y, Z, and then having people really question it, like, oh, because a lot of times people are growing up with rhetoric that they don't, not that they don't understand necessarily, but it's so ingrained that they're not fully aware of the impact necessarily. So I think questioning, being able to question them on the motivations, or what they're trying to portray, has been useful for me so far.
Awesome. I think that, yeah, and that's also like a less confrontational way to do it too, by asking a
Hmm.
question. Like, why do you think you're saying that? Or why do you think you feel that way? Versus like, you're wrong, even if they are wrong.
Right,
Like
and
sometimes it's
oftentimes
not
they
the best
are.
thing to lead with.
Exactly.
But also, I feel like even as being a teacher too, when we start with questions, people integrate the information more when they come to the answers, when they have that epiphany moment for
Exactly.
themselves versus being lectured at. So I think that's great advice. This is something we haven't touched on in this discussion, even though we've been talking about gender and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I'm just living says colorism in relationships question mark. So what are some of your, I know that's a big topic, but what are some of like your overarching observations about how colorism plays out in relationships? And I'm assuming romantic relationships.
So there are kind of two kind of almost competing streams I think I've seen. So I'll revert back to my focus group study, and the light skinned men are like, all women, they want a masculine dark skinned man, which is not going to be the light skinned group. And the dark skinned men were saying all the light skinned men get all the women, right? So someone's lying, and it's not really that somebody's lying, but so
Hilarious.
there's right, there are some undercurrents going on, right? So there's ideas of masculinity that are attractive to women, right? Assuming a heteronormative couple, um, and there are ideas of masculinity, so that would benefit darker skinned men. There's some ideas around beauty and aesthetic that would benefit lighter skinned men, right? So there's these kind of two competing things. Um, so one of the men said they always say tall, dark, and handsome. They never say tall, light, and handsome, right? And that's right. So there's these things. So that's just from my study. I think the research will show that on average, lighter skin folks are more likely to be coupled and and marry and so on and so forth. And women fare better in the marriage markets and whatnot. But I think there's definitely, these undercurrents of masculinity and colorism that kind of are at play at the same time. That's a great question, though.
Yeah. I also, so when I think of, there's, for the darker skinned men, I think featureism it becomes like a really, because the darker skinned the darker skinned men who are seen as like the heartthrobs, who are seen as like the gorgeous Tay Diggs, even a Tyrese, even like a Kofi Cerebo, their features are very chiseled
right.
out a lot of ways, versus other dark-skinned men who are considered ugly, right? And who would not garner that kind of admiration and attention because of their features. If you think of like Sterling K. Brown, a friend of mine, June, I know June usually watches, but I don't think he's watching today. Sterling K. Brown, because he has like bigger lips, right? And like a bigger, right? The people are less likely to compare him to like a Tay Diggs or he's even. And then even the thing, right? Like a lot of times they are, chiseled and have all these other things going on that contribute to their version of beauty or attractiveness as well.
Absolutely.
Hey, J. Ray Brown. I, as a brown-skinned man, have experienced such prejudices. Oh, well, you have to share for certain. For certain? I think that's what your screen name is. And then Jorge, aka Armando, if you're looking at the chat, said, "How do you welcome/dance with femininity?" And that's a question. That's a really interesting question, and I'm thinking about how I would answer that. But I'm going to throw it to you.
I'm gonna throw it back. No, let's see. How do I? That sounds like a dissertation defense question.
Hey,
Let me get back to you on that. No, how do I welcome femininity? I guess I would ask for clarification. In my personal life, in my research, in exploring colorism, it seems like a really interesting question. I really don't know how to begin with that.
Yeah, I feel you. I think so. My initial thoughts, and if Armando is still watching, please clarify, offer clarification. But I think about the idea that humans all have like masculine and feminine energy within them, and like whatever we label it. And so maybe femininity being the more the energy that holds space for that, latitude of emotionality, wherever your heart moves you.
Okay, philosophy. All right, let's see. I think you can do nothing but embrace femininity. I think, yeah, and I think I'll tie this to what I said earlier about patriarchy limiting the human experience. And I say this lightly, right? Because if I say that masculinity or being masculine or being man is a disadvantaged position, that's not what I want to portray. But I do think that there's as Dr. Webb noted, if the human experience is this kind of vast spectrum between this vast spectrum, I'll just say a vast spectrum that has masculinity and has femininity and has other expressions. To deny a group femininity, to deny a group the ability to express femininity, whether self-imposed or externally imposed, I think is in some ways limiting their expression of humanity. And to that end, I think to dance with femininity properly is to embrace it and to be able to express your full humanity in that way.
Yeah. Now I'm like getting into like gender stuff, but like it is that I think a lot of times that inability, that repressed femininity in men, that leads to misogyny, that leads to the hatred for women who are like this embodiment of something that they themselves can't, tap into or express for fear or, so more conversation is needed on that end.
Absolutely.
And I can't see your screen name anymore now that I've thrown the question up there. Alana Mooo. So she's asking, how do we as a Black community educate Black men about colorist biases in dating and relationships? Many seem to be in denial. Yeah, because I know what I do. I just don't. They
No,
they think, but go ahead. What do you say to
no,
that?
that, I think that's in part true. I think that by and large, I think there's a select group of the male contingency that is very stuck on denying colorism and just explaining it away with preference. And it's like, okay, well, where are your preferences coming from? Preferences don't exist in a vacuum. You don't just pick one out of the air and like, this is what I'm going to go with today, right? These things are in our lives since our infancy, right? We're starting to see somewhat now representation on TV where we see different black people from all walks of life. And by and large, so we're having probably maybe the best, I don't know the numbers on it, but maybe we're having the best representation on TV and in media. I know I joke all the time when I go to Target, the ads that I see in there, I'm like, oh, okay, there's like black people all over the place. Okay, so it's like, it's kind of cool. And that said, there's still like a lighter skinned folk that are going to be primarily taking these positions. And that's going to be the standard of beauty. So, there are these forces that are kind of pushing on it. So I would go with the question method if I engage at all. And it's like, well, why is that your preference? Why, if you say you don't have a disdain for dark skinned women, why is your dating history this? And even with some of my friends, right? So my homeboys, I got to ask them like, yo, you say, oh, black queen, da da da, chocolate sister. Okay, let me see if your past previous girlfriends have been, like this. So it's like, what are we really talking about? So sometimes you got to show them their own data and kind of make them realize. So that's a good question, though.
Yeah, I like that phrase, show them their own data. And also I commend you for, talking to your homeboys because I don't, so I was having a conversation with Dewan actually, and he was saying how like men are having these conversations. It's just that like Black women aren't necessarily privy to them all the time. Because I was like, why don't men talk about this? And like, why don't the Black men who say that they're the good ones? Why aren't y'all checking y'all homeboys and being like,
Mm,
hey man, like that's not cool or whatever? And he's like, well, we do have these conversations, and maybe they're just like out of earshot, like of Black women, But you giving that as an example that you do also, look at your friends and say, hey, we can do better, like we can call each other to a higher standard. And I think
right,
that's what we have to do in the Black community.
exactly.
Yeah, you are speaking the truth, bro. Healer Sister says, but do we want the brothers that don't want us though? I think we should start from our children. Okay, Healer Sister.
Mm,
I agree. So Healer Sister, I used to say, I've been saying this since college, like I don't want nobody that don't want me, and I use
that's
my
true.
Black Southern vernacular. So I don't want nobody that don't want me. So I feel you on that one. I think definitely starting with the young men and like showing them, even when we talk about representation, I feel for Black children because there's even less of it in children's media. Like a
Hmm.
lot of the
Hmm.
progress we've made in representation is like for adult consumption in many
Right.
ways. Even like the famous actresses like Viola Davis, right? She's not making cartoons for kids. And so that
Hmm.
I think there's a whole like segment, a whole arena like for talented creators who create media of various types to target Black children with these diverse representations in skin tone and having darker skin, girls as the lead character. I even think about the movie Jingle Jangle, right? And how I
Oh yeah,
love
yeah.
in the skin tones, but the girl, right, the little girl, right, it's still very similar to what I saw growing up, where the girl that I would aspire to is lighter complected. Um,
Hmm.
so, but I also say too that we also have to teach the teachable adults, right? So if there is
Yeah,
a
yep.
who is teachable, who's open, I think also teaching them because a lot of them might be raising sons, right? A lot of them
Absolutely.
might be raising daughters. And so, or they might have influence in the life of children. So teach the teachable adults and then like focus as much energy and effort into the children as possible. This has
Absolutely.
been a riveting conversation. The
It
group
has.
be having these conversations. A lot of us are just slow to admit we have been toxic we have these toxic biases and the implicit impacts this has. The Magic School Bus, Black kids are light-skinned now. I saw that. Was it your post that I liked? I liked somebody's post that was pointing that out. Marseille Martin just casted her new show. It's for younger Black girls. The casting is amazing. Thank you, Raven Roberts, for letting us know, putting this on. Teach the Teachable. So this has been great. This will be up on YouTube this week. But any last thoughts before we go? Thank you for joining. And I will be bringing Raven Roberts on, your partner in Own Your I Am, to talk as well. So for folks who want to learn more about the organization, I'll be talking with the founder at some point soon as well.
Yeah, this has been really great. I'm happy that we had the opportunity to do this. I think and I always joke that I'll sound like a broken record when I say this, but I feel like if there's one thing you leave away from going to anything where I have spoken on colorism, it's that we have to think about colorism systemically, right? So oftentimes we have these conversations and we're talking about the individual and micro and interpersonal, and that's important and real, and the day-to-day is very, very important. But we're talking about material consequences across time and space that are influencing the life chances of people, income, education, incarceration, so on and so forth. So this is a real issue that we have to hold to the same esteem, the same serious, same gravity as systemic racism, and that's where I think we'll start making headway when we can do that kind of consistently. So that's the last thing I'll say on that. And thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait for you to speak with Raven when she comes on here. She has a lot of great stuff to share. So yeah, you two are gonna be great.
Yay! Oh, I'm gonna be on your platform as well.
That's right. So we're having you on soon on a very interesting discussion on futurism and current events and whatnot. So I cannot wait to have you on.
Yes. All right. I was pointing to my wide nose here when you said futurism.
Oh, I was like, that got something on my nose? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, no. I was not signaling. I wasn't signaling. But everyone in the chat, unfortunately, Instagram doesn't save the chat, which is like terrible because the chat is so awesome.
Yeah.
But thank you all. We see y'all and all of your questions, comments, feedback. And yeah, I'll let you go. I know.
Oh, one last little plug, if I could. For all of you that don't follow us at Own Your I Am on Instagram, we are at Own Your I Am, and also the same on Twitter, Own Your I Am. So please follow. We have content pretty regularly on colorism, on kind of current events, things that are happening, and we also do lives on there as well, as we mentioned. So please do follow.
Yes, and you all accept stories, right? You all invite.
Oh yeah, we accept. You can DM us with a topic or concepts or things that you'd like us to discuss, and we'll take kind of a poll to see where the pulse is, what people want to hear, and we'll bring it to you all live.
Mm-hmm. And if you are watching live, you can click on the top left-hand corner of your screen. You'll see our images, Colorism, Healing, and Own Your I Am. If you click on that, it'll take you to follow their page like right now. And if you're watching the recording, I will tag them so you can follow them easily from there as well. All right. I'm trying to read the last little comments.
Ooh, yeah, that's a lot right there.
Okay, so yeah, Missy Camille, I see you. She said, I don't want half the ones that want us because they treat us as a fetish. Yeah, that's something I think about it a lot too for like, and there's a film called No Shade. No Shade. It's a UK film. I think this Black woman in the UK created the film, and that's one of the light-skinned characters. She realizes that her boyfriend doesn't really know who she is, doesn't like her for who she is, but was just fetishizing her lighter skin tone. And so, no spoiler alerts, but that's the thing there. Okay, I gotta stop. But I look forward to our next conversation. I'm excited that
Absolutely.
we'll talk again, and I'm excited that we'll have a group conversation with Raven included as well. Okay?
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone. I love you all. You know I do.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Take
Bye
care.
now.